everyone. My name is Casey Frith-Smith. I work for Fox on the digital distribution side, and I'm your moderator for the evening. And I'd like to invite all the panelists up. So Bruce, maybe we can start with you.
So I'm a general partner at DFJ Frontier Venture Capital. I am an entrepreneur that is a partner, as I said, in Muse Visual Effects and Nuantics, Internet Technology and Marketing. I am a 4K and digital consultant for Technicolor Worldwide.
Well, I'll just go one job. That could be it. Good guess. So Mark Turner, is this on? This is not even on. I'll just talk. Mark Turner, I'm at Dolby Labs, a company most people know from their audio technology. We actually spent a good 10 years now doing image research, and the first part of that is coming out this year called Dolby Vision, and it's very closely aligned with a lot of the work that's going on in 4K.
Hey, I'm Katie Fellion. I run operations for a post-production facility in Hollywood called Light Iron, and we kind of put our flag in the ground by being exclusively file-based. We founded about 5 years ago, and we've handled entirely file-based productions, about I'd say 80% feature, and probably the remaining half episodic content, commercial content. And so I've been involved in 4K since prior to that, in various iterations of post-production facilities. But for us, we've done some of the top tier 4K releases that you probably heard coming out. Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. We did a Man with Tai Chi, the Man of Tai Chi, and then upcoming Gone Girl, which will be a 6K release. So we know 4K, and we've seen it all.
Hi, Deborah Kaufman. I've been a freelance writer in the media and entertainment space for over 26 years. So I covered the evolution from analog to digital, the 20-year HD saga. 4K seems to be happening faster, but looks can be deceiving. Anyway, I write about a variety of topics in media and entertainment, but I love looking forward, and so I have lots of thoughts and ideas on 4K and what media is going to look like in the future.
But did you cover Betamax versus VHS?
I did.
Yes. Yes. We have so much to talk about. I'm Matt Lewis. I run a company called Angel Valley in Burbank. We do 4K. Well, my background before I did this was pretty complex. I worked at Universal Pictures and Warner around the turn of the century, which is bizarre to say. I don't think I've ever said it out loud like that. The turn of the century. It's so dramatic. And I worked as a Kodak cinematography instructor for a long time. So my background is in imaging science in a lot of ways. I'm definitely a film nerd. Still have a lot of cans of film sitting around my office. I helped Kodak develop their, that's a really generous way to say it, I helped Kodak test their digital film scanning stock back when that was a thing. And since then, our company now has a fully built out 4K production and post facility, and we're actually, we're one of the few companies I know of that are in the TV space here in Los Angeles that have actually originated, developed, produced, delivered, mastered 4K for television that's being internationally distributed. So we've been through a couple cycles as recently as a couple weeks ago. So that's where I come in.
Excellent, thank you. So I know a lot of you are familiar with 4K, but I think it still makes sense to start at the beginning and really dive into, Katie, I'm hoping to start with you. Really, what is 4K?
Well, if you want to argue about pixels, that's really what a lot of this comes down to. 4K theatrically is going to be 4096 by, depending on whether you're scope or flat. It'll be contained in something around that horizontal resolution. For a lot of television, episodic, a lot of online content as well, it's actually slightly different pixel count. 3820, 3840. 3840 is the UHD version of that, and then there's other. I guess we're here talking specifically about 4K, and that's really just a conversation of resolution. But that when you're talking about UHD, there's other aspects that fall into that too, whether it's dynamic range or increased frame rate, or a wider color gamut, and all of those sorts of things fall into the conversation of where we're going with the next generation of media.
Could I add something to that?
Yeah.
I think it's important to note that there is really no 4K standard yet, and the different groups are working on it, and there's lots of different groups working on it. So in the U.S., we have SMPTE, the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, recently issued a 25-page report issuing recommendations on how to proceed, and there's lots of issues regarding color space and converting color space. In Europe, it is the Digital TV Group, which is an industry association for digital TV in UK, and they are dealing with the European Broadcast Union. So, it could be NTSC, PAL, CCAM, all over again.
So,
See, this is an interesting conversation already, because the Ultra HD spec, as defined by the Consumer Electronics Association, strictly speaking, contains nothing other than resolution. It doesn't include wide color space or wide color gamut, high dynamic range. It's nothing, and we're trying to get it changed because it's a really spec to just rush out and say, "Oh, it's all about resolution," and the rest of it we'll just leave.
Well, and and then when you buy your 4K monitor, and that's all that it includes, and then all these other things come out, you end up having to buy another one too, and so that's part of the conversation.
Or you've got content from one region that won't really play on TV sets in another region, or et cetera. All those problems.
So 4K is more than just more pixels, right?
More problems.
No problems.
Tell us about that.
To their point, I mean, the standard, you talk about color space, Rec 2020. When we did the conversion from 601 to 709, which means in shorthand, we went from standard definition to high definition television, the amount of effort that went into making sure we didn't F that up was pretty substantial. And we didn't screw it up. Really, I mean, it was hard, but we got there and it's great. That same effort has not seemed to be put into this transition. The Rec 2020 color space, which is the new color space that everybody thinks we're eventually going to land at, nobody supports it. Like, Canon has like 2 monitors on Earth that actually have the beta firmware that support it. I've put my hands on both of them; they crash. It's not great. And to your point, there really is not enough being done in that to move that forward. To your point about 4K monitors, yeah, we have all of the 4K monitors, and none of them support 2020, and they're never going to. And we're gonna have to buy new ones when 2 years from now, when someone decides they should support it. So Rec 2020, there's a color space. You've probably seen it. Like if you open up Premiere, After Effects, or something like that, you ever see something that says 709, like Rec 709. It's a color space that's being used to determine what colors are available to you in the format you're working in. The new standard, theoretically, is going to be called 2020. I don't know how they came up with that number, but they've defined it. That space has been defined already. They just haven't. Yeah, it's available. They just haven't done anything with it, so you can't see it. I can't see it. Nobody in this room can see it. Because you don't have a computer monitor or a TV monitor that actually supports it. Your Mac doesn't support it. Your PC doesn't. Nothing supports it. And in theory, we're supposed to. Oh, you guys.
We've got one.
Yeah, you guys have
content.
one. Yeah.
But I'd like to make the point. The reason, with HD, I mean, these things were battled out in committees for 20 years. In this case, in the case of 4K, the tail is most definitely wagging the dog. What's the first thing to appear? 4K TV sets. The consumer electronics manufacturers are driving the move to 4K. I'm not saying that we don't want or like 4K, but it's happened. They've come up with TV sets for a standard that doesn't exist yet. So all these other issues that took 20 years to work out in HD are going to be playing out in the years to come.
So,
Thank you.
Do you know what UHD stands for?
Oh.
Ultra hyped data. Yeah. It's all hype. There's no real business here. Everyone's hoping there's a business there. The TV manufacturers cannot make any money left on their HD TVs. That's the only reason there's a UHD movement.
So Bruce,
Yeah.
does 4K run the risk of kind of the innovation for innovation's sake, kind of like the 3D craze of 2012? I
don't think it runs the risk. I think it is the poster boy for an industry problem, a solution in search of a problem. Yes. The thing I find fascinating in the different jobs I have is that I'll go to CES and it's dominated by a buzz around UHD. When, forgive me, as an old film guy, I'll call it UHD. I'm sure everyone on this panel knows why. So there's a bunch of hype around the new UHD monitors, and then there's all the software being developed so you can finish your projects in UHD. And then I go out into the normal world and no one gives a darn, to clean my language up. And my children are perfectly happy with whatever the resolution. And at one point I was joking about, so many of us might miss, excuse the expression, film. And I just wondered how many people in the room miss standard def? Okay, so there might be some meaningful part to the increased resolution, but I don't think any of us believe it's UHD today. You get a little ways back from the monitor, and it is pretty tough to see.
So and Mark, it's a question for you. I mean, is it the problem that we haven't really fully achieved the dream of 4K yet?
So let me just, I think what's driving the CE companies is this device here. They all make these devices too. And this has been fighting in the last few years since Apple came out with their Retina displays, became a fight for PPIs, pixels per inch. And what Samsung and LG realized is that people buy these damn things every couple of years, and the higher resolution you can go, the better and better and better. So why doesn't that work for TVs? Let's keep upping the resolution. And we're all rushing to get to 4K. As soon as we're there, guys, they're gone. They're off on 8K, and they want you to go buy another TV. And it's, unfortunately, the same model does not apply. People don't tend to drop their TV like they do these, and you don't replace them every couple of years. But, let's not forget that's the legacy that a lot of these guys are coming from, is let's increase the refresh cycle and make the old ones expire.
And the reason
that's absolutely
and the
fine.
reason we're seeing 4K TVs before we have 4K content to watch is because 3D failed. 3D was a joke. It was always a joke. I've always hated 3D. I've been pounding my feet about it for years. It's awful. It's always been awful. It's always going to be awful until it isn't. And right now it's awful. And they didn't sell 3D TVs. No, but I didn't change my TVs. I don't have a single 3D TV that I bought on purpose. I didn't buy it because it had 3D. So they want us to buy 4K TVs. I'm selling these TV manufacturers 4K content. That's what my company does. We're making 4K content for them to go out and play at Best Buy, so they can say, hey, look how pretty this is. So I'm shooting butterflies at 800 frames a second, on top of a fireball or something. It's like, it's amazing. And it doesn't matter what it is. They just want to sell the TV. But I do think that we shouldn't probably derail the whole conversation into just television, because this is supposed to be about 4K in general. There's the cinema aspect where there's actually some value to the increased resolution that's probably worth addressing as well. Yeah.
So that's a great point. What is there content that is more conducive to 4K or actually better appreciated and experienced in 4K?
Cinema, and to what Light Iron does, and Katie can probably talk about this more, but it's not that 4K fundamentally, that more pixels are fundamentally bad or a bigger problem, but we've been talking a lot about television, UHD being, in the context of television. Having more pixels is great. If I'm going to watch a 6-story tall IMAX screen, great. I'd like to have those pixels. Let's get a little sharpness out of it. And there's a lot of value in having the pipelines and the equipment and everything necessary to make sure that that's actually possible. And you can buy a RED camera for like $8,000 now or something. You can get a $800 Canon camera that shoots 4K video, for Christ's sake. But I don't know what I'm allowed to say here. But cinema-wise, there's a lot of value there. We're just seeing that, like we talked about before this panel, that's only 1% of the media being generated these days. The vast majority of what we do is television.
And I totally agree with cinema. And Bruce, this is the perfect point for you to pick up the other thing we discussed, which is 4K is perfect for a special venue. Oh, yeah. Right.
Yeah, the material you saw in the demo reel was special venue. And it actually speaks to, I think, a larger question, which is the industry changing because there's a discontinuous innovation where higher resolution is in the home and not in the theater for the first time, certainly in my life. And is there really a future for cinemas as we know it, and do we think that higher resolution like 4K will reinvigorate it when we know film was perhaps a little higher than 4K originally?
Well, 8K is coming, so don't worry.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think what you said about the phones and the pads and the viewing, I welcome the splintering of the markets. I welcome the confusion between television and features and resolution. I think that the exciting part and the important part, the reason why I wanted to make sure I came by today, is to say that the important thing is that we don't create, yet again, the caste system of haves and have-nots. That the challenge, I think, and the thing I wanted to emphasize, is that filmmaking and creativity is still the fundamental. It is still where the rubber hits the road. It's still where the real value is. And it's important, the beauty of what you said is that these tools in 4K are accessible to everyone, and the industry, the big players in the industry are hoping that it squishes the little guys again. And I think the important message is to make sure that however we do get to 4K, that it stays in the hands of every filmmaker, not just the most expensive projects.
And but to that point, and I love that, I've always said to the people that work with me, I'd rather trust like Bill Fraker from the ASC with a pinhole camera than this, some kid out of film school with the best 4K camera. And Bill Fraker's dead, So I really think it really is down to the artist. The artist is going to make the tool work in any case, and I don't care what they're shooting with.
Right, just because you have a camera doesn't make you a cinematographer. I'd love to just give you some numbers. I hate to derail you here, but everybody talked about World Cup as being the big launch event for 4K, and it has not. And I did some research and got some great numbers on it. There was Japan actually did an 8K viewing. But only of one event, a World Cup match between Japan and Cote d'Ivoire. 150 people watched it in Tokyo. There were, according to a research firm called Ovum, 3 matches were shown in 4K with screenings limited to public venues. However, another statistic showed that broadcast and streaming services were available on 5.9 billion screens globally, and that PC, tablets, and smartphones accounted for 57% of all screens watching World Cup. I'd say that's way more important than 4K.
The irony of that fact, to me, which I find the most fascinating thing, honestly, about this, is that it's actually not separating the filmmakers, it's separating the distribution mediums.
Exactly.
And the fact that the only way you can really get, I'll say UHD again, is streaming or downloading it today. Is that a valid, at least in our world?
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. I just love that. I don't know if it's going to push cord cutting, and I know where I'm sitting, but I think that's something fascinating that there's a 9 or 10-year-old that's discovering stuff, and they look at the TV and go, well, if I use my Apple TV or my Roku box, well, I guess Roku doesn't bring it up. We can't quite make that leap yet. But that transition is coming where they're just going to go, why wouldn't I just stream? Why do I need cable? Why do I need satellite? If it's about this bitchin' 4K image, I can get that streaming. And I love that that's sort of separating the men from the boys, or however you want to say that, in distribution. It's fascinating.
But it's really geographic too, because that's something that's only available in some of the the major cities as far as bandwidth wise, and that's especially in the U.S. the major limitation that we have to 4K streaming and the availability of that. It's amazing because overseas there's so much more bandwidth that's available, but here in the U.S. it's a precious commodity.
And don't forget the spectrum auctions. If with the spectrum auctions coming up, TVs will have even less bandwidth to, we'll hobble them even more in an effort to broadcast 4K, which will have to be highly, highly compressed.
Yeah, which immediately negates the point.
Exactly.
The amount of.
But you're viewing it on your 4K TV.
You're viewing it on my 4K phone before that. The amount of 1080p encoding that's done at 1.5 megabits, all your local broadcasts are just awful. I mean, Dish Network, I just had to get rid of it because they crushed it down so far. There's no point calling it HD anymore. Yeah. Anyway, I wasn't going to say that. So, but I think your point on what is the right content medium for 4K, I think is a good question. So, because it's not unilateral. So big screens, obviously, that helps. But there's, the way Dolby puts it, there's 3 ways to make a better picture, right? One is more pixels. No denying it, right? More pixels makes a better picture. There is a big debate about how close and all that sort of, but I'm not going to try and argue that 4K is not a good thing. Faster pixels, higher frame rate, also makes a better picture. Now, in the movie world, there's a big debate of Hobbit and 48 frames, and is it good, or it's better. But for sports, high frame rate. I mean, yeah, awesome. That's a great thing for sports to worry about.
Video games.
Video games, did you say?
Video games. Yeah, in gaming. I mean, that's also something that we're really used to
gaming actually is in 4K already, right? So gaming is easy to render because as long as you got a decent GPU, you can do gaming today in 4K. It's actually easier than trying to make a movie. But the third way is what we call better pixels, which is our way of capturing high dynamic range, which is brighter pixels and darker pixels and wide color gamut, right? So we bundle all that together. We call it EDR, Enhanced Dynamic Range. And that's better pixels. And better pixels work, regardless of the resolution. So you can have 4K with better pixels or faster pixels, and they're all independent. But if that first demo reel that we shot with that we showed on here with the flame coming through, that was, I guess this is a cinema projector, so that was a P3 color space, 48 nits maximum brightness, the cinema grade. And if I showed you that on one of our 4,000 nit monitors with a wide RIC 2020 color space.
You have a brownout in Los Angeles.
So admittedly uses a bit of power. But you would see that flame like you've never seen it before.
I must say,
you feel like the screen is burning. We took a scene from the last Star Trek movie, Into Darkness. That volcano scene at the beginning. And ILM renders everything in high dynamic range. You don't see it, but they actually capture all the different dynamic range and they put it together. So we got the original ILM masters, we cut them back together and show them on this 4,000 nit TV and measure the consumer response to it. And just seeing the flame of that volcano, people have flush responses. We can measurably see the increase in their skin temperature because it feels like it should be hot. And that's a visceral reaction that I've never seen from 4K.
well, less people think that the man from Dolby is overinflating Dolby. I'd like to say that I've seen this demonstration and it rocks. It's pretty darn good looking.
So do you think the focus should be on, rather than jumping to 4K, something that not a lot of consumers have the hardware or the infrastructure to deliver 4K, really focus on HD and better HD?
No, I wouldn't argue that. I'd say that I think you had the right point, is that the CE cameras are rushed ahead with the resolution thing, but we weren't ready. We haven't finished the color space. Dynamic range, we're bringing the stuff to market, but it's, we're kind of out there before the standards arrive. This is a Ultra HD upgrade, and that does include all the things that should be an Ultra HD and aren't in the current spec. That is sufficient to get people to buy new TVs. Just 4K right now. Actually, there's various different reasons why. If you buy the 4K TVs today,
I think if people buy just a 4K TV without the better pixels, they're going to be very disappointed. I don't think they're going to really see the difference.
I think actually it's going to be worse than that. In a couple of years, when the studios actually start getting a decent flow out, then the HDMI 2 specification is going to be mandatory, and the TV they've got today won't actually be able to play any of the content. So there's a few reasons why.
That's the bigger problem.
Yeah.
There's a rush to market thing right now, which is going to be a bit of an issue. That if you just bought one of those TVs, you may need to. You're probably rich enough to buy another one anyway, so it probably is not a problem.
Did everyone understand what he was referring to when he said high dynamic range or HDR? Everybody familiar? Really drives the luminance, and I can't resist. Dolby and Technicolor are trying to take the lead in that stuff, but it's a ways off. And I think one of the frustrations, I don't know for anybody else, but for me, is that when one part of an industry is driving a format for purely commercial reasons, you lose the artistic reason for doing it, right? The thing that drove me into moving to Los Angeles and to working in this industry was the creative art of the motion picture, the seemingly endless possibilities that the photochemical process could provide. And I think as we move towards, I think you said it very eloquently, the response you get from HDR is really, really different. It is really, really different. And a few of us were sitting here watching the demo reel before everybody came in, and we were, as pains in the butts as we are, going, man, that looks soft. Hey, don't those blacks look milky? And I don't know if anybody else thought that. It looked, yeah. And some of the animation that the Muse reel had looked quite a bit different, but exactly, it's the first. She just said it's a first generation projector. I think that the challenge really is to create a viewing format that drives the creative effusiveness of the individuals. That's the challenge.
I love that we're all like relatively young people. We're sitting here like veterans talking about Paris before the war. Like it sounds like we're all so pissed about that. No, but
urinals in the street.
Yeah, exactly. But
I lament SD.
Yeah, to your question though, like it's too late. Like Jim Gennard came out. They made the Red. Everybody's buying 4K. They tripped the wire before it was supposed to be tripped. Everybody thinks they're supposed to shoot everything in 4K. Everybody thinks they're supposed to post everything. Everything has to be 4K. We're screwed. Like it's like there's no going back. Everything has to be acquired in 4K. You got a couple more years of people shooting TV in HD, and then everything's going to 4K. Yeah, I genuinely think it's going to be the case simply because everybody now is going to come to expect, particularly like you said, the CE. We're selling 4K TVs. Sony, who owns Sony Pictures Television, and I'm working with these guys. The amount of internal pressure from the consumer electronics departments, the Comcast of the world, these people are pushing their production companies. I've just sold a show to Sci-Fi, and we're getting pressured by all these guys to push this and hey, what can you do to acquire this stuff in 4K now? So later, in 2 or 3 years, we can go back and remaster all this stuff from your originals and actually generate a 4K version of this.
Let me tell you why I think we're a ways away from that. You mentioned the Red, whose star is falling. If you look at the camera that's used in nearly 100% of the major TV shows, it's the Alexa, and that's a 2K camera. And Arri is not going to come out with a 4K camera until they're ready. And no time soon. So that's why I don't think people are not going to just jump and use the Red camera to get 4K.
No, I'm sorry. I should be more clear. I'm definitely not talking about the Red. I'm talking about just generally speaking, 4K as a concept, where everything's going in that direction. We're going to be acquiring, whether it's Arri. Thank God Arri is waiting on 4K, because Arri is the greatest camera manufacturer of all time, and they're getting it right, and they're going to wait till they get it right. And the Alexa is the best camera we've probably ever seen, and that's coming from a Kodak guy who shot film his whole life. Tim, my friend Tim here, and I both are. We held off. I was one of the original adopters of Red, and I put a deposit down on the camera when it came out, and I never bought it. I waited and I waited. No, I never picked up my original Red 1, and until I think we actually had to about 4 or 5 years later, 2012, to grab one we just put it off that long because it just wasn't there, but we wanted to be in. But yeah, from a Kodak guy, I really do genuinely feel, and I think Tim would agree, that the Alexa finally, with Game of Thrones season 2, we looked at and said, that's it, it's over. For me, that was my personal moment of looking at it and saying, film is dead. From my personal opinion, I'm like, I don't need it anymore. And so from that point forward, whether it's 3.5K or 4K, HD is starting. We're going to have to start seeing it taper off. We're going to have to start doing this all in 4K. So what the hell are we supposed to do about it? Because the post workflows aren't there. Like it's still very virginal.
Photographers are not going to use cameras that they
don't want. Not yet.
Katie, there was a point you were going to make earlier.
Well, I mean, it's actually really interesting to kind of hear all this, because from a post house perspective, my job is just to be camera agnostic and to make the pixels look the very best that they can ever look. And we don't get to choose what people shoot on. Some people will shoot on, a GoPro or a 5D or an Epic or a Dragon or, Alexa, or any number of cameras. And the whole challenge is ultimately about making the best looking pixels that you can, because you can't control where it's going to end up. And that's the other half of this conversation that we've been having. Is eventually there are, there are networks and distribution modes that are requiring 4K or that are moving very quickly towards 4K as being something that is more desirable. So does it influence choices? Yes. I don't necessarily agree that, that shooting a 4K acquisition and finishing 4K is necessarily something that's going to create worse looking images, because I look at our company's reel, and we've got some really good looking ones that have been done at 3K for a 4K upres. We've done 2K for 4K upres. We've done 5K for a 4K downsample and 6K for a 4K downsample. It's really just about being able to manipulate that with the post processes and the way that the cinematography is done with the acquisition, and making the best looking images that you can.
So let me just pick up on 2 points, one that you made and one that you made. I wanted that we should debate something, because we're all agreeing with each other far too much. So let me disagree with you on one point. So the Dolby Vision TVs are coming out this year, so it's not a ways off. But the beautiful thing about we have to put a chip in the TV that does some rendering of that. There's a special signal that came out of the color grading suite. And we generate metadata of the color grading suite, and we send it all the way down to that chip. And that chip matches the artistic intent from the color suite, exactly on what that panel can do. So we measure the panel, the color response, the luminance of every pixel on the panel, and then that chip at the end is rendering what that TV can really do at its very, very best. And in part of that process, we can override vivid mode. So
For those of you that don't know, that's also called Best Buy mode.
no, so as part of the rules, you put our chip in, then it can override. Now, and then the user can override their override. But the point being that is, because we have a chip in the TV, now we can actually guarantee artistic intent, right? And that is the way you have to do it.
Yeah.
But it literally takes the metadata out of the color grading suite, and it takes it all the way under the TV, and then the TV default can't do it.
And how much is it going to cost?
No, wait, was that you disagreeing with me?
I can't tell you what that is. Yeah, that was me disagreeing with you. You said it was a ways off. I'm just saying it's not a ways
Okay, so that's the Sharp.
I'm not saying which models.
Okay, so I don't.
Why announce it?
Okay, well, I'm going to bite my tongue and not respond corporately. But let me take any corporate hat off of any kind and say, you're going to get a strong agreement from me that, and I've written one of the guys and I've written a patent to support that. The inevitable goal is to go back to something we have had in data and software for a long time, which is an instruction set that accompanies the content, right? So wherever you watch that content, can we create an instruction set so when it's on the tablet or the iPad, it's maximized for that display and in the motion picture theater?
I mean, that's what they do
and I
with
think
a lot
there
of the
is
Netflix encoding right now, where you deliver an IMF file, and then Netflix is responsible for encoding that particular mesenary file into whatever flavor is supposed to be the best display for the device. So that's really
and
cool.
Technicolor actually has an interesting take on the same thing, and I more importantly, and I just to, again move away from any of that stuff. Fundamentally, I'm excited by the disparity of the displays. I'm excited by, I saw one of our partners had a 4K tablet that looked fantastic. I personally think that might be the best viewing medium I've seen. Ironically, I know everyone said the theater. For me, it was that tablet. It just sucked me in, and it was right here, and I was really startling. I love the idea that we actually are separating out now the content itself from the display. I started at Technicolor years ago, and 20 years ago we were working on creating a look that was zeroed out, and based on the display we would match that look. And I think you said something that we all agree with, which is if the filmmaker intends for it to flash at the moment of the sunrise, we want it to flash that in any medium and any display it's watched on. And the creative intent of the filmmaker is, in some cases, very muted, in some cases, very splashy. And the ability to take that palette and give it, forgive me, I'm going to come back to this, give it back to the person that has this silly iPhone controls on his cheap camera, I still think is the most powerful part of the whole movement. That as much as I love the 4K pipeline, as much as I love whoever's version of HDR makes it out of the marketplace, I love the idea that a filmmaker has more controls than he ever had before, or she ever had before, and that it's accessible to people that don't drive around in trailers with craft services following them. And it's, to me, as I said, it was meaningful that this conversation is taking place. Then thank you for what you said about YouTube supporting 4K. I love the fact that it is not rarefied air, and I'm hoping HDR doesn't become rarefied air too.
I'm going to pick a fight with you just for fun.
Thank you.
You said, and I actually don't even know if I agree with what I'm about to say. I'm just going to think it out loud. You said you like the fact that filmmakers have more control now. I feel like I had more control over my image when I could pick my film emulsion, pick my film lab, and then know that it was going to get projected. Because 100% of the time,
experts only.
Right? No, but what I mean
There were
is,
10 people in the world that knew how.
but what I mean by that is, I could compose an image, very basic. I mean, film school level stuff. Just I could compose an image, take a light reading. I knew my film stock because I knew it, and any film student would. And you can go and you can develop it. You know how long to develop it for. You project it. you can land really close to knowing what it's going to look like, and you know that if you copy that film and send it all around the country, it's going to look pretty. Your colors are going to stay pretty close because people can't. There wasn't so much stuff going on where you could screw with it. We didn't have DI. We had chemical development, and I'm not saying that we don't have an incredible tool set now. What we can do now, we can manipulate the image.
That's entirely the reason for why we've gone to a digital finish. It's because you can't control the film process, and that's something that a lot of creatives argue is the magical, nebulous part of it. But it comes down to if what time is your film coming through the lab? How many other films were there? Who, did somebody sneeze in it? All of those sorts of things are going to change the look of what you're developing. And so the flip side of the argument is with a digital, a digital process, entirely digital, you have complete control over exactly what the creatives wanted to show.
Except for the vivid display. And what I mean by that.
I can't explain Best Buy mode. I can't do it.
Right. No, the point I'm trying to. And I developed my film with you guys at Technicolor. You guys did a great job of continuity. But having said that, the point being that there was a time in an era where you could control your image because there wasn't enough stuff to screw with it between the viewer seeing it and the theater seat. And even with the DCI P3 standard and everything there's now, which is great, there's so many more tools now. Even if you think you're looking at the image you're going to get, the amount of knowledge you have to understand color spaces. Somebody was asking about 2020 and 709 and what that means. The amount of technical ability and the amount of technical people that have to exist in the workflow to control your image to make sure that you can get that. What's it going to look like on an iPad? What's it going to look like on an Android? What's it going to look like when it's compressed on Roku? What about the difference even between DirecTV and Dish? We had a commercial we aired that had a moire pattern that showed up only on Dish. The amount of testing we do to through MPEG encoders and looking at the discrete cosine transform that gets put on by the JPEG compression algorithm. We really do some science on this stuff. It's really difficult now to control images. We have these huge tools that are great, and I'm a technician. I love this stuff, but it's a trade-off. We've lost some of the artistic aesthetic, some of that beauty that we used to have, that little simplistic image control and trade-off for really powerful controls.
And I'm curious how that.
However, in the film days, how many directors watched dailies with a VHS tape in a hotel television that had never been calibrated by anybody and made color decisions that way, though? Because just playing devil's advocate.
And I'm curious how that affects from a content production side, right? How does that change the narrative? How does that change the stories people tell, or how content producers are creating?
Thank you for that question. And here's your $20. No, I'm not a very good one, but I'm a guitar player. And my brother was a classical guitarist, and for years I'd listen to him just pluck, a very limited set of chords and listen to the resonance of the instrument, and I learned how to be a luthier, and I learned how to build these wooden guitars and get the different tones, and I thought, oh my God, this is a whole new world. And then I worked at a music store, and the presets on the amp said Marshall, tube Marshall, and I thought, oh, this is just stupid, and I plugged the Strat, and I went, oh my God, this is fantastic. Because I could now do what Pete Townsend could only do in a very, very rare environment with monitors that made all our ears bleed. The point for me, and I mean this very specifically, is I'm helping a filmmaker today get distribution for his film made on his iPhone. And the reason why it's interesting is because it sucks you in, it's dramatically appropriate, and he got it made for $450. And as long as it's dramatically appropriate, as long as the beats work emotionally, I love that person got that made and is going to get it out into the distribution medium.
Oh, I completely support shooting.
Yeah,
like I said,
that's the VC side of me.
But like I said earlier, I support the right artist on any equipment. That is fundamentally, absolutely the case, completely, and that's definitely not part of my argument. I think that's absolutely brilliant. No, of course, but I think I'm just trying to play a little bit of devil's advocate so we can create some sort of debate. Since I'm the old film guy, I'll just take the film stance, even though I don't necessarily think I'm right about this. But there was some aspect of control that I felt we traded away for the greater. 10 controls were given up in exchange for 100 really good ones, and now of course it's great that I can pull my iPhone out and make something that could actually be sitting in a theater someday and make some money.
So I would make one. So about the creative vision, right? There was a big change when we went from SD to HD, because we also went from 4:3 to 16:9, right. and there was a lot of interesting things happened with sports, right? They suddenly realized that actually you could shoot differently, you could zoom out a bit, and you could show more of the pitch, and more of the players would become suddenly you could actually see them and stuff.
That means the field.
The World Cup is on right now, and they have pitches, and they kick the ball and they pick it up. So, anyway, that's real football. So, with 4K, the shooting or framing a scene doesn't really change from HD. I haven't seen any creative that we've had come through and go, I'm shooting in 4K, so it's a different experience for me now. I need different kit, or I'm going to have a different light. No. But the HDR changes, which we haven't seen anyone do. No one's really shooting a movie right now with HDR in mind. But they will have to start doing things differently when they see the screens that can render out something that different. So
our demo crews are shooting. You'll probably be shooting
Right.
HDR.
We did HDR.
You're available to shoot HDR.
if you-
We're in Costa Rica. Yeah, we shot a.
how many stops?
We shot a 16 and change. Well, we shot it on a Dragon, and we shot a little bit of HDRX stuff, which is it's HDR. Yeah, but we did some to test it. Yeah, and it was very loud. The Red Dragon sounds like a Harrier taking off, especially when you're at the top of a mountain in Costa Rica. But this I completely agree on, like high dynamic range stuff.
And
it's so much
case
more
in point,
important.
right? So we have a scene again from that Star Trek episode. There was an ILM shot, and you're looking out through the hangar bay doors, and in the Blu-ray on the DCP, you can't see anything out the doors, right? It's just white. It's just far too bright, and the rest of the scene is dark. When we get back and get the high dynamic range originals, suddenly you can see all this detail. In the skyline, you can see the Bay Bridge, and you can see the buildings at the distance. And we thought, this is awesome, right? Look at all this extra detail. And we showed it to the special effects supervisor, and he's like, oh, expletive. I didn't want anyone to see that. I didn't think anyone would ever see that. I thought that was going to be gone. If I knew that you could see it, I would have put all this extra detail in, right? I would have actually taken the time to actually render out some more stuff out there because I didn't expect anyone to ever see it. And at that point, I was like, this is going to be a different creative
All right.
medium.
Does anybody remember this exact same conversation with HD? The exact same conversation. Oh,
The actresses and the makeup.
You'll see their
I
wrinkles.
did some work with Playboy when they were doing the HD thing. They were like, do we
So-
want to do this?
And that was a big conversation that ended up being like kind of much
Right.
ado about nothing.
Wow, no, Playboy did a lot of research, by the way. And the answer was, no, they did research. Do consumers really want to see that level of detail? And the answer was, oh, yeah, actually they do, which is kind of not what they were expecting. But
That's what I say I'm doing when I'm looking at Playboy's research. We-
Definitely coming off the 4K conversation.
No, but
it's still about
SNL.
resolution.
SNL is a good
Pixels.
example. I worked with NBC for a while. A lot of my friends were on SNL, and I remember I was there, and they were just doing the HD switch on Saturday Night Live, and they realized that they could no longer use gray duct tape to emulate like a pole. They used to just like take a wooden stick and wrap it in gray duct tape and put it in the background to be a little bit out of focus. They switched on the HD cameras and all their sets went to hell. So their set design budget went through the roof because everything now had to be actual aluminum, and like it happened really quickly. It was kind of like an over the summer type thing, and they had to go find the money to increase their budgets for the whole thing. Yeah.
Right.
People will rely on virtual sets more and more.
I think
Yeah. There's
there
hidden
is a
costs.
risk that having more resolution, more color actually takes people out of the movie magic, right? If you can sort of see if you can see makeup, if you can see the backgrounds and skylines, if you're distracted by the art of filmmaking.
But yeah, that just means everybody has to up their game. It's the same thing as what we went from SD to HD. Everybody adapted and became better at what they did, and the same sort of thing is happening with 4K and HDR and all of these other increases in terms of the image technology. You just up your game. You become better at filmmaking.
And the most savvy, sophisticated viewers right now are children. I have come out of movies where the kids are like, "Did you see those matte lines?" Seriously, because they grow up
Right.
watching images. So yeah, everybody has to up their game.
I'm curious. I mean, if we're in this transition period, where we haven't quite realized this dream, right? And where CGI is mostly done in 2K, which I've learned from speaking to all of you over the past couple of days. One thing I was curious about is if graphics are still in 2K, and will we see a maybe less use of CGI as a result potentially?
No CGI. No.
Well, I guess we're qualified to answer that
Yes.
as the visual effects company sitting at the. Hell no! What, are you kidding? The thing that came up for me when we were saying about 3D being a joke and being a piece of crap. On behalf of Jim Cameron, I take exception to that comment. I actually love 3D, and I admit it. I have croak. I'm still coming out of my mouth from standing up in front of the Editors Guild and saying 3D's here to stay. But the reason that the things I liked about 3D, the immersive nature, the things I like about the goggles, help me guys, the Oculus Rift, thank you. What it actually does is it gives everything artistic a chance to shine. That's what I really believe.
Actually, I have
that the more immersive and the less separation is between the image and the viewer.
Assuming the execution.
Bruce, did you see the
absolutely.
restored Wizard of Oz? That was actually also in 3D, a very gentle 3D.
No.
They did it, and I got to say, as much of a
No.
naysayer as I am about 3, it was awesome. And one of the things that it did is you really got to see the artistry that went in
Yes.
to making that movie, and it was just brilliant and beautiful.
I actually wasn't around for the production of that particular feature.
No, I'm talking
Might
about
be the only one we've
restoration.
mentioned that I wasn't.
The restoration.
But as a visual effects company, and I carry my friend's bag. He's the talented one. I really do think stereo and honestly, especially HDR, lends a new creative palette, and that's what I found cool about HDR, and that's what I found cool about 3D, is that I worked at a camera company with one of us sitting in the audience, and we had Iconics cameras. God rest their soul. Was these little small cameras that you could move in and out, and were very, very flexible and very powerful for stereo. And I love the fact that you could have a filmmaker do something unique, and I don't mean a spear coming out of the screen towards your nose, but the fluorescent flowers in Avatar, I think, is a palette you can only get in certain mediums. I don't think 4K gives you a different palette. I mean, I don't. I have to admit, I don't. And I do think, and I'm going to agree with my friend from Dolby here, I really do think HDR gives you a different palette. My challenge is that it becomes very artificial. The challenge for me with HDR and all the material I've seen by you and by everybody that shot it, the Technicolor and the Dolby, it looks damn artificial to me. It looks very overamped in the luminance, and at times it just looks hokey.
It looks like
Now
something.
but it's the first generation, so I'm
Just
not
because it
making.
looks like something's wrong, it looks like it's different than what you can see in real life. Instinctively that you shouldn't be able to see all this at the same time.
Yeah, I actually, it's weird. I thought the same thing about The Hobbit at half frame rate. And it took me halfway. I was like, why does this look weird? And it looks like TV. And that's the point.
Yep,
And
but
that's what you're not expecting.
But high frame rate, a lot of people think 48 frames per second is not anywhere near fast enough. And have you heard about Doug Trumbull working with variable frame rate, which I think is really where you can dial it in up and down.
Right.
So I think
Yeah.
I think the jury is out on variable. On
See, the
frame
interesting
rate.
thing is there's a few scenes in high dynamic range which suddenly. So I keep coming back to the same example, but there was a bridge scene where you pan across in that Star Trek clip, and you notice the judder a lot more in high dynamic range, and it's because the contrast is higher and the edges are sharper, and therefore you notice edges higher. That's why it seems perceived to be high resolution. And at that point, you actually think, I would really like to be able to dial up the frame rate at this point. That's what I said at the beginning. You need all three to make a better picture, and there might be times where you interchange them.
That's when it gets really creative.
Right. But there are certain, it does have a completely different look. And I think half of that is because you're not expecting it, like you're not expecting high frame rate to look, for the movie to look different because it's high frame rate. You're not expecting things to look different because it's high dynamic range and wide color gamut and Rec 2020 and all sorts of dull science, and it makes it look, wow, that really makes a huge difference. And it suddenly looks a lot more like real life. And there's a lot of scenes that you see, a lot of the stuff that we're shooting, and people do, and we do dial it up, right? Because you're trying to prove the point that there's a lot of dynamic range that you can use. But suddenly, some of these scenes, you look like you're looking out of a window, and you've never seen a movie that looks like you're looking out of a window. They always are muted and the colors are more. And so the question is it a different medium, or is it that people just need to learn how to use that palette, right? It's like literally give them another couple of thousand colors and a whole extra amount of volume to put those colors in, and then say go crazy. And we've actually done a lot of work with colorists where, we'll grade something up higher and, pump up the luminance, and then they'll come and they'll bring it all back down again to maybe 10% above where they had it. Because, they had a look in their head when they graded it, and it was based on, 100 nits worth of luminance that you get and in the standard. And then, you ump it up and they suddenly go, no, it didn't look like that. It should look like this. Down here, that's what I put it at originally, and they go, all right, I'll make it this instead. And we're like, no, look, you've got all this space now. Where do you want to go?
Well, we've been seeing 30 frame per second or 24 frame per second content our whole lives, and now we're, you try to do The Hobbit, which I didn't even see in 48 because I just refused. But I think that a lot.
You're such a film guy.
I know, I'm the worst, and I know it. And that's the thing, and that's kind of what I'm trying to acknowledge right now is that I'm the worst. I'm the worst person to take that to because I'm so programmed to I subjectively view that as being just wrong. I look at it, and to me, specifically me, it jumps out as like, this is wrong. But if I hadn't been experiencing it that way my whole life, and you showed me 24, I think the exact same thing.
So there are a couple of scenes where there's a scene where they're on a cart going through a mine or something, right?
Of course there
Very
is.
high fast, right? And then you go, I remember that in the book. And you go, actually, this really works. And things like the original Transformers movie that was almost unwatchable because there's just crap going everywhere and you couldn't see anything. That would be perfect in high frame rate. And it would save him have to do slow-mos so that you can actually see what's happening. But there was a scene in the beginning of The Hobbit where, what are they? The guys with the hairy toes.
Hobbits.
Walking around.
That was perfect.
Walking around in their burrow. I watched it. It was a while ago. And you could tell that they had fake feet on. They looked like penguins. They looked completely uncomfortable. You could see they had extra extensions on their toes, and the actors were uncomfortable. And because there was higher frame rate, you could tell that they were the feet were bouncing, and it just really became really distracting to me.
It's difficult to
I
have.
was looking at their toes when I really shouldn't have been.
Right.
It's just difficult to have.
You're pulled out of the narrative at that point. I mean,
Yes.
it's distracting.
But why is it? And why is it distracting? I think it's because it's hard to have an objective conversation about this because this isn't a right and wrong issue. It's a perception issue. It's a we're trained to see something some way issue, and it's really to me as simple.
To your point that we've seen this at 24, 30 frames per second our whole lives. I mean, are we just in this transition period? Well, that will eventually be normal to see it at 48 plus.
Well, and so the flip side of that, because we've done so many Fincher projects, every frame that he does is touched and entirely stabilized. So then when that gets filmed out and we watch the print, it's actually a little bit disconcerting to see because of the jitter. And so the jitter that's just naturally, apparent on a film print actually looks wrong. The same sort of way that, you're talking about Hobbit's foot bouncing along. When you're so seasoned towards seeing something in a particular way, you see it in a different way. It's you have to relearn what's right.
I kind of feel also that there's the palette. We now have a whole lot more dimensions to media and entertainment. And I don't mean the third dimension, but I mean we have high frame rate or variable frame rate. We have high dynamic range. We have more pixels, and we have more platforms. And I when I started covering mobile entertainment in 2004, when everybody thought I was crazy, I thought that a young generation of people would experiment with media across platforms. You're just beginning to see that. I think it's going to take a fresh generation that doesn't have that same upbringing with film to experiment and find ways to, we're going to enter a very creative world, and we either have to roll with it or,
Yeah, it's true.
So let me just, if a lot of people, and I was talking outside about 4K and the stress on storage and stuff, and how we're talking now, imagine this, 4K or 8K with 120 frames for every second of video. And how are you going to pass that around in the facility?
Tim and I just posted a project at 60 frames, 4K, uncompressed on total commodity equipment. This is probably a situation a lot of people here have. Mac Pros, hard drives, and 60 frame uncompressed 4K at 33 megabytes per second, which comes out, it was 600, 700, 800 megabytes per second sustained for 9 terabytes to play through the whole show. And not that you can't do it. You could go buy a Thunderbolt LaCie 8-big that everybody sees on Amazon. You're like, oh, that's great. I'll just plug this in, until you realize that in our world, it's a shared media. We can't do that. We need fiber channel SANs. So there's these two worlds that exist right now. Actually, there's three, because you live in one that I don't live in right now, which is you have the light iron, you have the big iron. You've got like you have Genepool, you have the Quantel solution at Light Iron. If you guys watched the NAB show reel for Quantel, it was about her company, and it showed a very beautiful build that you guys have.
There's a very robust hardware solution that allows us to do a lot of things in expedited ways, because that's the requirement for the job. In order to be able to have quantity, to be able to handle multiple shows and have multiple seats going, you need to be able to scale that. So.
Yeah, and then we have a second version of that, which is you guys have the HBOs, the Universals. I'm working more on to be honest, like Discoveries and sci-fis, and there are different budget levels and different grades of these projects, and we can't for that project, even if we wanted to use that solution, we couldn't, just because it's not feasible for a number of reasons, the least of which isn't budget. So how do you answer a cable network that has a few $100,000 an hour for a piece of content that they want to do in 4K and say, hey, look, you guys have to do this, you have to deliver it in 8 weeks, and there's no way you're going to be able to pay X hundreds of dollars per hour to go in on a Quantel solution or something, which is a beautiful solution. And
well, it's that that triangle that exists, right? It's you can have it
fast,
good,
cheap,
you can have
good.
it fast, you can have it cheap,
Pick
right?
two.
You get to pick two,
Yeah,
and that's exactly how it seems like most of media still works, especially as we're getting into higher and higher, resolution and
right.
frame rates and all of these other things. The more challenging it's going to be, the price point is probably going to increase in order to be able to get all three of them.
Yeah.
Or the quality is going to go down, or it's going to take a ton of time to finish a project.
And where we were at,
Price is going to go down.
yeah, exactly, I agree. And where we were at was price goes down, and that's where we were
That
at.
is very true.
Was he was saying the price is going to go down, which is what had to happen. We had to figure out how to do this fast, good, and cheap, and we had 4 weeks from the time we sold the show till when we delivered it. 4 weeks total. So it was like day 1, sold the show, day 30, delivery, 4K. It was a half-hour show. And we had to build an entire 4K pipeline in that timeline. We had a lot of equipment already at our office. We have a fiber channel SAN and all that. We have the level 2 of what you have. We have a big SAN with all the fancy blinky lights and a fiber channel, all the workstations. But we use Premiere. We're primarily right now a Premiere shop. We use shared storage. It's on the old Apple Xserve RAIDs that you saw 10 years ago. There's a lot of that stuff built out, but it works, and it's like just the poor man's version of a big Quantel solution. But that was the only way that we could afford in the budget for the show to actually deliver this content. We edited on a Mac laptop in Costa Rica all this 6K Red Dragon footage. We did it using the original R3D media because the laptop Premiere could do it. We took the Premiere project back from Costa Rica, put it in our online system, which is just a Mac Pro sitting on a desktop with a ThunderLink fiber channel adapter, and linked to the R3Ds, and mastered the content in SpeedGrade and Resolve, and output it and delivered it on a drive. And we had, that was the process. And that process barely worked, because it's pushing every single piece of equipment we had to its absolute, way beyond what it was intended to do in the first place. But we had to write little tools to fix problems with XML files and like DPX exports and like stuff that Adobe says it can do and is absolutely lying about. It just says, the XML just imports right into Resolve and it's going to be gold, until you realize that the frame rate change in Resolve just bricks your system. And that little slow rolling screen that says something's wrong with your Mac, and it's like the really bad error message, not the one that's like Finder wants to quit this. It's the one that's like, just fucking go to lunch, just forget it.
We get those too.
Yeah, exactly. So we deal a lot in like trying to figure out how do we, to your point, it has to get cheaper, because 99% of the world's doing TV, and this isn't going to work.
So that was it's a creative solution that you were forced to come up with, but in a sense, the entire industry is faced with the need to come up with creative solutions to deal with the bandwidth constraints, deal with the consumer hardware constraints, deal with the production constraints. So does it create a opportunity for new players to come? And even though if the heavies are kind of driving 4K, does it create opportunity for new businesses, new companies?
Yeah, well, absolutely it does. The genesis of my company's name, Light Iron, is because we actually, despite having a fairly heavy iron infrastructure, we also rely pretty heavily on software and developers, and realizing that a big part of our business is going away because people are able to do it themselves. There's the technology is getting better and better every year. It is getting cheaper and cheaper every year. and what you're able to do on, a laptop or on a home desktop system with, some fast RAID systems and being able to spit it out onto a distribution network in 4K, that's absolutely doable. And YouTube is we're sitting in a room where people do that, and I'm sure content is shown here that goes through that exact process. So that's happening every day. It's just going to be happening faster and faster.
I think, the part of the question I thought was so interesting was, will it empower new filmmakers or new creatives? And, as we were talking and you were talking about HDR, I was thinking about the filmmakers that I've helped in my life. I try to occasionally work with, excuse the expression, I feel like such a dork, but with young people that have that pounding in their heart that need to do a creative expression. And they don't see Vivid as a problem on their TV setting. They don't. It ain't never bright enough. It is never saturated enough. It is never loud enough. It does not have enough pounding beat ever. And the sensibility or the subtlety that we might appreciate, and I'll try to keep this age agnostic, is definitely a thing of the past. And I love the fact that whether we think HDR looks natural or you think HDR looks natural, to them it just looks effing bitchin'. It does. And the filmmaker... Huh?
That's a direct quote.
Yeah. I could see that in Deborah's article tomorrow. But whatever I think was too loud of rock and roll, whatever I think about Avatar was too bright and was too oversaturated and was too over the top, is not held by the masses. And I love the idea that there's another generation of filmmakers and another generation behind them that couldn't care less. They actually thumbed their nose at the Quantels and they thumbed their nose at the SGIs. I'm dating myself.
Awesome.
I know. But
great.
the big irons. Yeah, I know. I dated myself totally.
Cool. I love it. Yeah.
But 8-track tape, yeah. But they really, they are like, screw you for having a big iron. I don't need it. I'm going to show you with a pocket knife that I can carve things you can't imagine. And that I find exciting, and that vibrancy of being raised on a video game and an iPad and their phone and just doing creative expression for the sake of it, to me is like the transition from the Renaissance. And I just love going through, the Museum of Modern Art and going, the first time someone saw this, they went, what the hell? Why would he do that? And now we look at it and go, yeah, of course, that's a beautiful expression. And I can see the image, and for me, that means this. And to me, that is what's so interesting. 4K doesn't necessarily give you that advantage. It's the new tools that give you that advantage. It's the thing that I just was enjoying hearing you rattle off your toolkit, right? Which was all, you can buy it off of eBay. A lot of that stuff is not new. That toolkit is the toolkit of the future with the tools of the past.
And that creative
I love that.
That creative renaissance, what I talked about, all the different dimensions of all the tools and the platforms, it hasn't happened yet, but it's got to happen. I mean, there's
it's happening in video games.
Yes, it is happening.
It's happening in video games.
Though.
But it's going to take over all the platforms, I think.
So I think it's a great note to end the panel on and open it up to the group for questions.
So, talking about video games, are frame rates per second different? Because on a souped up PC, I can go 90 or higher frames per second. Are they doing a different measurement, or what's happening that on a computer you can get so much more?
I can get into that a little bit. It's the same number. It's really frames per second, but it just comes down to the fact that you're generating something from nothing, and how fast can your computer do that?
It comes from the fact that you're now having the trucks with the catering wagons and everything behind you deciding whether that frame looks great. This GPU's just rendering it and throwing it out. And in the gaming world, which is a lot of the reason why these kids have got a sort of creative angle, that's what looks right. That high frame rates is perfectly normal for them, and you actually need it, and you need a really fast internet connection so you can see the guy about to shoot you in the head and shoot him in the head before he gets to you. That's why you upgrade your gaming rig.
But TV is standardized with a particular frame rate as films have been. So.
It's also much different to look at something that's rendered, right? That's graphic rather than, live action at those frame rates.
Right.
I say that as a gamer.
How you guys doing? This question is actually for Matthew. How do you see, with the introduction of the new technology and cameras, how do you see the depth of field as an obstacle that's been addressed? I know that's been an ongoing
depth of field
concern.
being sensors are getting larger and you're getting more depth of field, so to speak. I mean, that's been a creative issue since since we've changed film sizes from 8mm to 16 to Super 16 to 35 to Super 35 to Super 35 cropped to anamorphic. Depth of field is simply a creative issue. Of course, we're selling you a lot more expensive glass than we used to. I mean, I was going to mention before we finish something about the fact that we're definitely convincing a lot of people that don't need a lot of equipment that they need a lot of equipment. Not just in post and everything, but just generally speaking, the cost of the barrier to entry, while we've made cinema cameras and everything more affordable, certainly than buying a $200,000 Arri studio camera, you can go buy a Red Epic for what, 30 or 40 grand or something. The price point's dropped by 90% in the past 10 years to get the same kind of performance. But we're definitely convincing a lot of people that don't need that gear that they need that gear to go out and do their job. And I don't always think that's true. Yeah, you're buying glass. We're selling a lot of kit. I mean, the Canon and these guys are making a mint, selling a lot of really, really high-end equipment to a lot of people that don't have the need for it, that immediate need for it. So when you ask about depth of field, that's always going to be a creative issue. But I think that we're getting these gigantic sensors on these cameras now, and you have to buy or rent substantially more expensive glass than you would have had to on a camera you probably could have got a similar result out of, since if you're never planning on showing it on a screen this big. It's kind of my thought.
Thank you. This question, I guess, would initially direct to the gentleman, the panelist on our right. You. Thanks.
Bruce.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Bruce. I'm a developer, and I came here to push out of my space to find out more about what's going on in other spaces so I don't get siloed. When you let off in your part of this discussion, you were kind of talking about how this 4K standard, this 4K technology really isn't standardized, in the sense that there's a lot of conflict and fighting, and by implication, it sounds like there's going to be more of this sort of fighting in the follow-on technologies. That matters to me, because I build software and I need standards, standardized tools, standards, period, to build, to effectively work in this space. And if there's not standards, I don't want to deal with it. I mean, I don't want to step into a holy war. I mean, I see enough holy wars on YouTube.
Holy war on the stage.
Well, but a civilized one. I mean, I don't want to deal with it. I mean, I'll go back to databases. We have enough holy wars there. Right? I mean, I'm a developer, and on this issue, I have a vote. And if you guys, not you guys, but if these tools, if these technologies are not standardized, I'm not going to deal with it.
Well, nothing on the
Well, I have good news and I have bad news.
Fix
The
it,
good
Bruce.
news is, as a developer, you will not be out of work for the next 35 years.
true.
The bad news is, the people of this panel are driving disparity and chaos like you cannot imagine. You've got, even at HDR, which everybody agreed was a cool thing, you've got two people seeing the world completely differently in a race to try to deliver their standards versus their standards.
If you want a voice, join SMPTE.
Yeah.
If you've ever looked
Yeah.
on the back of a piece of audio equipment and seen SMPTE/EBU, what you were talking about earlier, the EBU is the European Broadcast Union. It's the same two people arguing about these standards that have been, and arguing is not the right word. The same two people deciding the standard has been deciding everything for the last 30 years. That you've seen.
Committees of these people that decide the standard, so
Right. And as far as standards go, I mean, IPv6 wasn't ratified until damn long after they started implementing it. We have the equivalent amount of standard problems as you're going to find. I mean, you want to talk about holy wars between Postgres and MySQL, for Christ's sake. But I mean, we have an equivalent amount of standards problems. I mean, if not less than what you're going to find doing development on the internet.
The
in my
important
opinion.
thing to understand about standards is just as a general rule is they don't innovate, right? The iPod was not created by a standards building organization. Companies innovate,
standards catch up. And unfortunately, that's exactly what's happening in 4K. That's exactly where we started. It came full circle beautifully. The CE companies have gone, we really need 4K to happen, so we're going to go build it. And then the standards need to then catch up.
But then to address,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, to address what you're saying though, then it becomes a gamble on my part because I have to gamble on which technology will break out and succeed.
Get out your 2D20s, buddy.
And I could very well lose.
Yeah.
Yes, you could.
But,
Yeah. And I was at Microsoft in the HD DVD war. So.
You know, I was just going to say, I think the last thing you said is the key, which is you have to bet on something. And honestly, that's the good news. You're not being forced to march to someone else's drummer, so to speak. And, you know, there's my friend sitting in one of the rows here, and I have knocked out a couple of software developments of our own. And there was great empowerment to being able to make some of those decisions for ourselves. There was great enthusiasm and invigoration in deciding what we thought this should be. And the other holy war going on that none of us have brought up is the patent holy wars. That it is very real. And if you sit,
Red versus the world.
Anyone that deals with the inside workings of this technology knows that there's patents. People are rushing out. Samsung, among them, is rushing out to get their patents filed before the other guys so they can fight literally a court-supported battle. And I think the beauty of what you said, truly, is I appreciate personally you being a developer and coming here and asking these questions. I really do. I do. And I want to empower you to do what you think is right. As a filmmaker, I did the shot I thought was right. And if it was overexposed, if it was underexposed, if it was oversaturated, it was a creative choice I made. You and your ones and zeros have got to make those same creative choices. And I empower you to make the decisions that you feel not only are the democratization of what you do, right? The fact that you can sit on a computer and write code that is as powerful and dynamic and change the world as any company is the democratization of the software. And I think to your point about film giving you certain controls in digital, what I love, and I admire my friends that do it, is the ability for you to create a look and a medium that you can write in ones and zeros and put up on that screen and change the way any of us think of it. So no matter what you hear here, no matter what standards are created, do what you think is best, speak to the filmmaker or the vision you have, and let the power of the code you create dictate what the standards are and what gets adopted. Fair?
This is just a clarification question. You keep on talking about how everyone's pushing to 4K, but as a user, I can't see it, right? And most people can't see it, right?
You can in Best Buy.
Okay.
You can buy a 4K TV today if you want to on the way home, and you'll watch two things on Netflix, guys. Is it two? House of Cards season 2, and what's the other thing? Breaking Bad's coming in. Really?
And soon a company none of you have ever heard of called MGO will deliver an entire library of motion pictures in UHD. MGO is? Yeah.
So you can see
over the Hayden Court. Yeah. I mean, I spend a lot of the time of my day, which is a long day, trying to figure out how to get UHD into everyone's life in a straightforward way that doesn't require a bunch of new infrastructure. And I will promise you that within 12 months, you'll be able to get most of the motion pictures you love in UHD.
Also, you know, the countries that are going to drive 4K TVs by numbers are countries with less legacy infrastructure. So China, for example, you know, there are a lot of people that maybe their first TV is going to be a 4K TV because they skipped standard definition and they skipped high def. They're rising middle class. In terms of penetration, though, the research firms feel that U.S. is going to lead, but it's going to be 10%. 4K is going to be 10% by end of 2018. So, and only 10%. So
I would just say that.
That's low.
Yeah, that seems. It's the refresh rate. I mean, chances are you'll end up just buying a new 4K TV. I would argue that
Herb, you've already got 10%.
the screen that you're typing on now, it was going to be 4K before your TV is likely to be 4K. So, you know, that's the dumb thing, is that thing goes way over 1080p, and I don't know, it's probably a 2-year-old Toshiba. So the resolutions are coming. You will be able to watch it right there before you can watch it on your big screen TV.
That's true. And broadcast is in a lot of trouble right now. They're losing a lot of their spectrum. I mean, I tend to believe they're...
You're talking about actual broadcast place.
She
You
means
mean over the
air.
airwaves.
Oh, it's yeah.
Yeah. There are 8% of Americans that get their TV that way. So
this is good. So final thoughts. Mac, can we start with you?
Start with me. That's a lot of pressure. Yes, I ran out of thought. No. We. It's a big pain in the ass to make it, to generate the content. It's a huge pain in the ass. I mean, it's more of a pain in the ass than when we went from SD to HD. That was pretty straightforward, to be perfectly honest. They had it figured out. We don't have this figured out. You guys have. A lot of people have said that consumer electronics is driving the transition, which is absolutely true. They're trying to sell you TVs for technology we haven't even figured out how to make yet. I mean, we figured it out, but they figured it out like in a lab. It's like if there was like a beautiful hallway with like a guy, like a little butler outside, like we're making 4K, and you open the door, it would be 100 people screaming. It'd be like, ah! It's like, you know, like that's what's going on behind the curtain at every television 4K house. You know, it's a big mess. So if you do buy a 4K TV, make sure it's HDMI 2.0 compatible. That's the trick. There's 1 or 2 on the market right now that actually are, but again, probably wait. And don't think you need to rush out and buy yourself a red just yet. There is time. Don't spend the money unless you really think. You know, so many people own these cameras and they've never even seen it. They go, oh, I own a red and I own glass, and they go home and they watch it on their laptop or their HD TV, and they've never even seen. I mean, I would just venture to bet that half the people that own red cameras have never seen a 4K image. I would venture to bet that. You think more than half? Yeah. So that's my. I'll leave that as my final thought.
One of the things we didn't talk about is the ideal viewing distance for 4K TVs. And that is another reason why a 4K TV in your living room is probably not the way you're going to be watching 4K. I'm a big believer in 4K for cinema and for tablets and for gaming, I think, but not for TV. I just really don't believe that 4K TV is going to be a big thing. I'm very excited about the creative possibilities of high dynamic range, variable frame rate, and more pixels being combined and used across platforms. And I'm very excited about what a new crop of creatives are going to be doing with that. But you're probably not going to be watching it on TV.
So I guess kind of to that point of new creatives watching new things on new TVs, find the right project and find the right tools that are going to tell the right story for what you're trying to do, and that whether that's an Epic or a 4K camera, or if that's an Alexa, or if it's something that's a game or CG technology, find the tool that tells the creative story you're trying to tell, and then do it, and don't forget what all of us are saying up here, because ultimately whatever path that you choose is going to be the right one for the story you're trying to tell.
Probably. So I would say this 4K train has left the station, and it's almost inevitable that it's going to get everywhere. And we may argue how far you have to wave away from the screen, but I remember all that when the 720i standard, which is Fox wanted to use for sports, in fact, and then 1080p, which is just a more theatrical sort of look to it. And now it doesn't matter because every TV is 1080p. It doesn't matter how small it is. And then everybody was saying at that point, you know, you'll never tell the difference between 720 and 1080. It's absolutely true. You won't tell the difference of 4K either. That doesn't mean it's not happening. It's happening. Off we go. We're off and running. But I would just say let's make sure that we don't forget that they are just pixels, and actually making better pixels is actually more bang for your buck than putting more pixels on the screen.
So I'm going to take a totally different angle. But I still want to say bravo to what you said about matching the tool to the filmmaking. So I think what is the big chicken bone in the throat of 4K, like that one, is monetization. I've had the pleasure of suffering through studio meeting after studio meeting where they go, I cannot monetize this. Why should I pay more? Which is why I made the joke and everyone nodded in agreement that it'll be cheaper. We have a big copyright problem. we have a really, really big copyright problem. And in a funny way, 4K is going to compound that problem. The difference between a motion picture that we once thought was $100 million and no one would ever touch it and no one would ever duplicate it, now is randomly, you can pick it up in Hong Kong and you can pick it up in Sri Lanka and you can pick it up in London and you can pick it up off the street. And you don't know if it came off of a video camera that was shot in the theater that it was projected in, and you don't know. It was actually the original element that Jim Cameron or Steven Spielberg or whoever else is getting their 2 cents on. I think that monetization is the problem beneath it all. I think we are driving, and maybe that's the money guy in me saying that, but we are driving so hard to push people on this panel and people out there to deliver more for less. Deliver so much more for less that eventually the chain breaks. And I believe the chain breaks at the point of the copyright. I believe the chain breaks at the ability to track all those versions of all those shows and actually get them monetized and paid for. And I think 4K is the great divide. I think that the 4K element by its nature actually is very difficult, as we talked about, to broadcast on satellite and broadcast through cable. And it really begins to change when now all we can do is download or stream. It changes the perception, certainly in my kids' world, that something in the theater is more valuable than something in the TV, and something in the TV is more valuable than something on the computer. They don't have a clue what I'm talking about, and it never occurred to them, and they don't really know why they have to pay for content, why they don't have to pay for content on YouTube, and they do have to pay for content on another medium. And I think, for me, I'll just say, the rubber hits the road when that filmmaker has no way to get their product made. They cannot keep a day job. They have to do a day job because they can't make a living as a filmmaker. And Hollywood doesn't mean Hollywood anymore. I think the decentralization of filmmaking, the democratization of filmmaking is a good thing, but I think somehow managing the copyright and figuring out a way to make sure that filmmakers and musicians are still a job description and not a hobby is an important challenge that all filmmakers face. Yeah. And sports shall save us all.
I just want to say thanks to the panelists. Thank you.